Well, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to get together with you most weekday mornings at 8 o'clock Central, and we talk about a very important topic. I would describe it as a formula, that if we could follow a formula that would allow any business to qualify for a significant amount of business funding, this is it. We're going to literally go through what it takes to have a fundable business. I think you would agree with me. There is no shortage of small businesses that want and need capital. But there's two problems. The first problem is often they're not fundable. In other words, they don't meet the underwriting criteria, which we'll talk more about, of lenders. And secondly, they don't even know what that means. What is it that they need to do if they wanted to become fundable? So today we're going to take a very practical, a very relevant approach to looking at what does it take to have a fundable business, regardless of industry. So what we're going to talk about is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. What does it take to have a credible business? At any point, if you have questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and just type that into the Q&A, the question and answer of Zoom. It's like a chat box. All right, so with that said, let's get started. So why does this matter? Well, it's important, as I referenced, lenders and credit issuers will often automatically decline your application if you don't meet the approval standards. So there's not a whole lot of discussion and explanation. It's normally the loan package. It's the numbers. It's what's presented on paper that determines if your business gets approved or declined. So there's this formula, and if we meet it, we get approved. And if we don't meet it, we get declined. And if that's the case, then it makes a lot of sense to know what the formula is. Because if we know the formula, then we can meet those expectations. We can check the boxes. One of the challenges that we often see is that many entrepreneurs, not all, and maybe not you, but many entrepreneurs have this consumer mindset. They see everything from the viewpoint of a consumer versus a business or a business owner. That's a fatal mistake, because business funding, business credit, business in general is different, and in some cases much different than the way that we operate as individuals, as people, as consumers. So one example of that is, so often we'll talk to entrepreneurs and they're so worried about their individual credibility. Maybe their credit has taken a hit or they have other personal issues, but they're overlooking the fact that we should be focused on the business, the credibility of the business, and the fundability of the business. We need to separate the two. Another reason that this matters is that so often entrepreneurs come to the wrong conclusion, another fatal mistake, that a new business can't look good on paper, that it can't be credible, that it can't be fundable. And that's absolutely inaccurate. And we're going to talk today about very practically how we can work together to make sure that any business, new or not, looks strong on paper, what that means. Because we'd be foolish to think that we can't improve the 3 C's, commonly called credit, collateral, and capacity, referenced as solvency here. So we can adjust legally and ethically how any business looks on paper very quickly. And that's the secret sauce, is looking good on paper, even if it's a brand new business. So that's what we're going to talk about. And if we do that, then we get approved for funding. If we don't do that, we either won't get approved for as much, or have much higher cost of capital, higher interest rates. So let's drill into that. What I do want you to understand, though, is we go through these 10 mistakes. What we're doing is we're identifying common mistakes, but also talking about how to fix it. So it's not just if this is a problem, you're sunk. Not at all. If this is a problem, we'll talk about how to fix it. And we did apply for the grant, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes, and receive the grant to help you with these credibility factors. So let's go ahead and get started with this checklist. And I will mention there at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, ChapmanLoanProgram.org. That's our resource site. So after the webinar, you're welcome to go to ChapmanLoanProgram.org. There's several resources there. There's the link to apply for the grant subsidized program. There's a link to become a distribution partner. We have a number of folks that are out teaching this at churches, at chambers, at community centers. Some are teaching it online, others in person. So if you'd like to help us carry this message out and help improve financial literacy in the entrepreneurial space, please visit ChapmanLoanProgram.org and you'll see a link to become a distribution partner. But let's get back to the focus here. So mistake number one that can prevent a business from being fundable is their address. And you think, well, of all the things in the world, why would the address be that big of a deal? Here, we're not talking about the address where you actually have your desk and work from. Instead, we're talking about the address that is the official location of the business. And as we go through this, you may say, well, that's BS. That shouldn't matter. Well, these things do matter. So it's really not about your opinion, and it's not about my opinion. It's about what are lenders looking for. They're looking for a real business address, a unique business address, not a shared address. So not a suite number that other people use. You might ask, well, could a home address work? No, it's not seen as credible. Could a post office box work? Because that's a unique address. No, it's not seen as credible. Keep in mind that in most cases now, lenders are going to actually ask for a copy of your lease. And that's one of the things that we provide to the participants in the grant subsidized program is literally a legally compliant, well-documented lease, because they don't want you just to say, oh yeah, I have an address that meets the underwriting criteria. You need to, what they say, prove it up. You have to demonstrate that it's really your address. Now, some of you may have gone down the road of WeWork, which is now in bankruptcy, or Regus, owned by IHG, or other shared office virtual addresses. But I can tell you without question, these shared office virtual addresses are not seen as credible any longer. So banks, the business credit bureaus like Dun & Bradstreet and others don't like those shared addresses. They're not seen as credible. Now, also keep in mind that the address matters in terms of where the funding comes from. And the reason I say that is that there are some lenders that are national, but others operate on a state basis or a region basis or even by county. So there are some funding sources that are not national, thus the location matters a lot. One of which is the Chapman Fund, which we're going to talk more about as we get to the end of the presentation, mistake number 10 specifically, and how the Chapman Fund works, because it's not from a bank, it's from a taxing authority that has money to distribute. With that being said, that's one of the perks that's available to you, is a free business address that does provide geographic access to the Chapman Fund. So the green here just simply means that's a resource that's available to you. And again, that's free for participants in the Startup Business Funding Program. So that's mistake number one. We need a good address. And that's typically where we should start with, because everything else is going to use the address. And if we have a bad address, it's going to be bad in a bunch of places. And if we have to clean it up, that can be a little bit difficult. But we need a good address. Mistake number two, entity selection. So to get financing and or credit for your business, it's better to have a true entity as opposed to a sole proprietorship or just a partnership. Corporations, S Corp or C Corps can work. LLCs can give you also more credibility. And obviously having a true entity also helps reduce your liability. Dependent upon your capital raise, if you're wanting debt or equity, if you're wanting equity, equity investors almost always prefer a C Corp. Now, two things about location and entity. First of all, it's recommended that we form the business in the same state as your business address. And that kind of makes sense. However, we don't need to worry about forming the business or having the business address where you live. That's irrelevant. So you see the difference between those two. Now, again, through the grant, we'll actually pay for the Secretary of State filing fees, so you have a new compliant business entity. So again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can type it into the question and answer Q&A of Zoom. It's kind of like a chat box. Okay, so we've covered 2 mistakes. Let's go to mistake number 3, business name mismatch. A common reason for funding applications being denied is that there's an inconsistency in how you're using your business name, or they can't even find it. So your business has a real name, and you shouldn't shorten it or abbreviate it. We should use the business name, and it needs to be on the applications that we're submitting in for funding. It needs to match with what's on file with the Secretary of State, needs to match with what we have at the bank, and so forth. So we need to have a business name that is consistently used across all documentation. Kind of makes sense, but often we'll see people that will mismatch. Now, let's say you own multiple businesses. That's fine. That's very common. We could do a capital raise on multiple businesses even, but each business needs to be consistent. Each business needs to have its own name, and we'll talk about EIN in just a second, and have its own identity. That's the point. So any type of online listings as well, everything needs to match. We need to make sure that it matches. All right, so mistake number 4, we need to make sure that the business is in good standing. Well, what does that mean? Well, within your Secretary of State, they're usually tracking, is the business in good standing or not in good standing? And so we need to make sure that it is in good standing and that it shows as active. Depending upon your state, what you have to do to accomplish that may be different, but there may be annual reports. Many states have state income taxes for corporations and for businesses. There's a handful like Texas that does not. But you need to make sure it's not, don't make the mistake to just form a business and then think, oh, it's fine. There's no other work or expense that needs to be incurred. In fact, we have to keep that business in good standing. Make sense? Mistake number 5, and I made reference to this earlier, every business needs to have its own federal tax ID number called an EIN. An EIN to the business is like what your social security number is to you. So we talked earlier, each business needs to be separate with its own name, preferably with its own address, with its own EIN. Now we're going to need that EIN to go open the bank account. We're going to need it to build out the business credit profile, which we'll be talking about here in just a moment. So the EIN is obviously very important. So we want to make sure that everyone, the federal government, the state government, banks, and otherwise have all the right information that all matches. Now, what we're doing through the grant is creating a new entity for you that's compliant, so there's frankly no cleanup. And that doesn't mean that you can't continue to own your other business or other businesses, but for the grant, we needed something that was reliable, that we're confident, we have 100% confidence in that it will work. And so when you take an older business that might have issues, it might not work. But this approach, we're going to take you through step by step and build out a fundable business so we can be absolutely certain that it'll work. People hate uncertainty. There's no uncertainty if you build a business from scratch correctly. And then, of course, the EIN is relevant because we want to pursue business funding under the EIN, not under your social security number. We need to have, and we'll talk about building business credit next. We want to get funding under the business. We want to separate the business whenever possible from you as an individual. All right, mistake number 6 goes into the business credit topic, and there's really 2 slides we have on the topic of business credit. The first of which is just getting our profile set up correctly. Now, Dun & Bradstreet and Experian Business and Equifax Business are the 3 most popular, the largest, the most well-known business credit bureaus. They typically will pull from public records from the Secretary of State that when an entity is formed, they recognize that entity. They put it in their database. But the problem is that it's an incomplete profile. They're just grabbing some information, not enough. So mistake number 6 is incredibly relevant as we prepare to go to funding to make sure that the business credit reporting agencies have our correct information, everything from our right industry code of what we do, the address, making sure the address is right, making sure that the contact information is correct for the business, and so forth. We should not assume that just because Dun & Bradstreet knows who we are, that our profile is complete, robust, and fundable. It won't be on its own. It just won't be. But we're going to help you build that out. And of course, we do that for free. So we see often people get declined when they don't have their profiles optimized. So again, lastly, we're going to help you get that set up properly so the business is fundable. That's the common theme of our discussion today and each morning is what do we need to do to have a fundable business? And this is literally a checklist that you can follow on your own, or you can participate in the Chapman Loan Program, aka the Business Startup Program, and we'll do it for you. All right, mistake number 7. So on number 6, let's go back to it. Number 6, we set up our profile. But now that our profile is optimized, now we're ready for mistake number 7. Let's build up our business credit scores. So business credit is different than personal credit. We have scores that go from 0 to 100. So we need to make sure that our business looks credible when any lender or extender of credit pulls a business credit report for us on our business. Again, business credit's different. Anyone can pull a business credit report on any other business. You don't have to have their permission like with personal credit. So what that means specifically is, for instance, with Dun & Bradstreet, your business has or will have a PAYDEX score. Again, it's on a 0 to 100 basis. We want it to be at least an 80. With Experian Business, again, it'll have a score called an Intella score, somewhere between 0 to 100. We want it to have at least an 80. What we're going to do to accomplish that together is we're going to add primary trade lines. We're going to literally add primary trade lines under your EIN so it has demonstrated that it has had access to credit and managed credit. So this is important. Now, some people will ask, well, what are the examples of trade lines? There's many, many different types of primary trade lines that we can add, and we'll work with you based upon your specific needs, wants, and preferences. And of course, we do that for free through the grant. All right, so then we get to mistake number 8. We need to have credible financial statements, and I'll define what that means. And so, of course, the lack of that would be a mistake. So every business, even startups, we cannot fall into this excuse of, oh, I have a new business, so I don't have this. I don't need this. It's not relevant to me. That is a cop-out. That's not accurate. We need to have strong financial statements even for a startup. And those main 2 financial statements would be a balance sheet that shows the assets and liabilities of the business, not of the business owner, but of the business. And then what's called P&L, profit and loss, and/or income statement. Those all mean the same, showing revenue and expense. Now, I understand if you have a brand new business, maybe no revenues come through, and maybe you haven't even had any expenses. So I'll give you that. But the balance sheet is incredibly important, and we should be able to have a strong balance sheet the day after a business is formed. So please don't fall into this mindset, oh, mistake number 8, that doesn't apply to me because I have a new business. Well, that's a fatal mistake that will probably cost you the approval on the funding because your business doesn't look strong, it doesn't look credible on paper. So there are some ways legally and ethically to rapidly strengthen your financial statements. And so we're going to transfer assets over and put them on your balance sheet from the get-go. We're going to also provide access, if you need, to the Opportunity Fund that provides daily deposits into your business bank account. So the bottom line is we're going to help you build credible financial statements for free because we know it's crucial. It's crucial for this formula to become fundable. Mistake number 9 is collateral, and I started to scratch that surface a moment ago on mistake number 8 when we talked about the balance sheet. So different types of funding, of course, has different underwriting criteria. If we're trying to get a business loan, typically they're going to be, they meaning the lender, is going to be concerned about what do you have to pledge. In other words, what are the assets that you're pledging that mitigates their risk, their exposure in case of default? And that is reflected on, typically, on the balance sheet, which we just talked about. So while different lenders have different collateral requirements, we really need to have collateral on our balance sheet. And as I mentioned to you a moment ago, we're going to provide that. We literally provide the assets in the form of accounts receivables and put those on your balance sheet, legally and ethically, of course. So that takes us to mistake number 10, overlooking alternative sources of financing. So once we've made it through mistakes 1 through 9, if you can go through that and check the boxes and say, yes, my business meets those criteria, then we're ready to go to funding. So that's really what we're talking about on mistake number 10. There are many, many, many different sources of funding for businesses, including startups, SBAs or otherwise. So there are some unique sources of capital that you might not be aware of that I do want to conclude today's conversation with making you more familiar with. One of which is the Chapman Fund, which we referenced early on. And of course, it's in our URL on our website. The Chapman Fund is a source of funds that is available to start or grow a business. It can be used for a variety of different purposes, for fixed assets, new construction, renovations, leased property, equipment, inventory, working capital, etc. So it's great in many aspects. One downside or one negative is that it has a cap at $250,000, but we could certainly use the Chapman Fund for the first tranche, get the first $250,000, and then move on to other types of capital, other sources of funds afterwards. So we can stack. We don't have to stop at $250,000, but I'm just wanting to be very transparent. The Chapman Fund does cap out at $250,000 per business. So we're going to help you geographically qualify for that. So with this page, this gives you kind of the rundown of what the value proposition is. So we have a 501c3 nonprofit. Our nonprofit started in 2016. People often ask me, well, how long have you all been doing this? Well, the answer is we started in 2016. Our origin came from when I and several others, we were all public school teachers. I was a public school teacher at Aubrey High School outside of Dallas, Fort Worth. I taught accounting 1, accounting 2, economics, business information management, and computer programming. And we actually won state championship academics for computer programming. But separate from that, in terms of where this came from, so there's this group of us that were teachers, and we realized, wow, we're teaching all these business principles to these young minds, these 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, but so many adults don't understand what it takes to have a fundable business. It was ironic. Here we are teaching teenagers these concepts, but most adults, most of their parents, most of their aunts and uncles, most of their grandparents didn't know what we were teaching these kids in school. So we formed the nonprofit in 2016. We have grown since then. We received the grant allocation for this program earlier this year in 2023, and we rolled out the Startup Business Funding Package. What does it do? It addresses those factors that we've been discussing today. It provides a free unique business address. It provides free filing with the Secretary of State. It provides free assistance in getting your EIN. Then, of course, then we get the bank account. Provides free assistance in building out your business credit profile, including adding those primary trade lines we talked about. It includes us transferring over those $10,000 of assets, the receivables we talked about. So you have collateral on your balance sheet, even if it's a brand new business. It includes free geographic access to the Chapman Fund and free access to the Opportunity Fund. Sorry, I reversed those. Our contact information is here. As far as next steps, it's pretty simple. If you want to participate, you'll go to chapmanloanprogram.org, and there's a two-step process. Step one is to watch the training video, but frankly, that's what we just went through. So you could proceed to step two, and there's a link there to engage, to plug in. Super simple. And or if you would be generous enough to help us go out and teach, whether it be in person or online, we're looking for financial literacy educators. Sometimes we call them distribution partners. And you can accomplish that quite simply on the Chapman Loan Program. Under the Resources tab, there's a link, and you get plugged in. You have our contact information, email, phone. What questions do any of you have today before we end today's Zoom so I could assist you? We've got 4 minutes left for questions. All right, so Felicia has a question. Can I access this Zoom presentation again today? I keep missing something of the presentation. Maybe snippets. I'm not sure what she said there. But Felicia, yeah, so there's a recorded version of this on chapmanloanprogram.org. So absolutely, you can go to chapmanloanprogram.org. There's a recorded version of this complete presentation. And then also, we do it live most Mondays through Fridays. So if you want to come back and join us tomorrow or another day, you're welcome to. If you're a distribution partner, you can bring prospective participants, and that way we can educate them how that it works, so forth. All right, let's see. Another question is, would a C Corp be preferred over an LLC? Oh, I think that depends upon the client's circumstances. So I don't know that there's a general answer to that. And then Ken asks, what is the name of the app that provides newly formed businesses name, address, and contact information? I don't know what you're asking, Ken. That's my fault, but we will help you with that. You can reach out to us individually. Samantha's asking about funding. So as we went through the 10 steps, the first 9 were really a checklist of what you need to have a fundable business, and then we move on to going to funding. Samantha didn't ask this, but I think it's what she's inferring. How long does it take? We need 30 to 60 days to get a business from the ground up, from start to being fundable to do these things. And the primary time consumer is building out the business credit profile, but 30 to 60 days. Now, let's say that you needed funding before then. That's fine. We can get you initial tranches of funding. And again, everything we do is very transparent. If you go to chapmanloanprogram.org, under Resources, there's a link, and you can click that link to get funding offers. When you do that, you'll get offers. There's no hard inquiries. You can accept the offers that you want. So we can get initial funding right away. However, to build out a business from scratch, as we're proposing here, it's 30 to 60 days. Anthony has the question of, well, what if I already have a business, or what if he already has a business? Well, that's fine. So now, Anthony, you have the checklist to follow. If your business meets these credibility standards, you are ready now to go to funding. So then go to chapmanloanprogram.org, scroll down towards the bottom of the page under Resources, and again, there's a link to get funding offers. So if you have a credible business, we don't need to recreate the wheel. This lesson is for, and this resource, this grant was for individuals not as fortunate as you, for people that don't have a credible business. Now, what if you're caught in the middle? You've got a business, but it's not really fundable yet. Well, then you need to make a decision, right? You can either fix the things that are not credible or leave that alone for the moment. Come over to chapmanloanprogram.org, enroll in the Startup Business Funding Package. We'll build a business from scratch that is fundable, and then you could use the funds from that to support your other business or other purposes. But it's really up to you. But the grant was intended to take anyone from 0 to 60, using car terms, essentially from the ground up to having a fundable business in 30 to 60 days, and we provide the scope of services. It's not a cleanup program. Cleaning up is uncertain. It can be expensive. It can be frustrating. It's too volatile. So we don't have a cleanup program, but we do have a program that we can start from ground up, build it out in 30 to 60 days. Hopefully that helped. All right, and I think we got two more questions here. So Cornell's asking for information. That's fine, but we have 628 of you on, so I can't do a good job of responding to each of you, but you can go to chapmanloanprogram.org. There's a 2-step process, Cornell and others. Step 1, get trained on how the grant works, which is essentially what we just covered. Step 2 is to plug in. So it's super simple. Doesn't matter if you're in Georgia like Cornell, or if you're like Eric in Hawaii. It doesn't matter where you're at. The resource, the program is standardized. All right. Well, thank you all for your time. Hopefully you'll come back and join us tomorrow. Bring a guest or two. The grant will pay you $1,250 each time you bring someone in that gets educated and participates. So it's a nice side income for helping build the financial literacy of others. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.